Ambassador Dolgov, thank you very much for this opportunity. And let's start from the most fresh events. So the written responses from the US and the NATO are in Moscow already. What do you think have yesterday's statements of Secretary Blinken and Secretary General Stoltenberg changed for Ukraine? What is your perception?
Thank you very much for this question. As you know, the documents prepared by the United States and NATO are not public. So what we could discuss, that's a general vision and line of understanding and communication with Kremlin. And as I believe you took note, it was also stressed that the response of the American side have been drafted with also the opinion of Ukraine incorporated.
And all the partners and
yes.
allies.
So what is important for us at this stage? That as it was confirmed many times, no discussions about Ukraine, about future of Ukraine without Ukraine. There is no veto right on possible eventual membership of Ukraine or any other European state in NATO. It's not the right time not even to discuss, but even to raise the issue of the spheres of influence. We are in the 21st century. That is why it's, again, there is a understanding that the situation which have been created by the Russian Federation is not acceptable. It's not right wording and way of communication. And responses from Washington and NATO, for me, was a clear signal for Moscow that their ambitions are groundless, and to formulate and to seek for their unjustified requirements, there is no even slightest way of communicating. And Russia received signals that there are things to be discussed, of course, as usual. But this is the third pillar, points to be discussed, or which we can possibly discuss with Russia. First two things are much more important. And number one is nobody is forgotten. Nobody is forgiven to Russia. Everybody understands that Russia occupied Abkhazia, Tkhinval, here. Russian troops continue to stay in Transnistria.
Right.
Russia occupied Crimea and continue to support proxies on the east of Ukraine. So this is the reality and problems caused by the Russian Federation, without mentioning other outcomes of its policy. And what we see now, and this public, open, so-called proposals of the Russian Federation to regulate security in Ukraine, it's just an attempt to play their own rules, which is not acceptable.
So, taking into consideration all this, what you described now, do you think the escalation of the situation, renewed aggression of Russia, is just a question of time? I would like to refer to the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman. She took part yesterday in one of the Zoom conferences of Yalta European Strategy. She said Mr. Putin may not have made ultimate decision on further invading Ukraine, but we certainly see every indication that Putin is going to use military force sometime in Ukraine, perhaps between now and middle of February. And we also had yesterday very strong statements from Secretary Blinken and General Secretary Stoltenberg about helping to strengthen Ukraine in parallel with the diplomatic attempts. So is it a question of time or something else?
For us, for Ukraine, it's not a question of time. It's a question of preparedness. We must be ready anytime, because we know whom we are dealing with. And it's clear that if Ukraine, together with our allies, didn't manage to convince the Russian Federation to withdraw its troops from the east of Ukraine and to stop to support proxies. So the only response that we can offer for our citizens, for Ukrainians, is to increase our capability to defend our land, to defend Ukraine, to defend our sovereignty. And of course, our efforts would become much more fruitful in order to deter aggression and to prevent any attack on Ukraine or any other country, because it's not the fact that the aim is Ukraine. Nobody knows. We cannot read their minds. So for us, support, international support and solidarity is valuable. We appreciate very much every step, but again, we would like everyone to understand that's not, the question is not only about Ukraine. It's about European and global security. Ukraine, just a test case of ambitions and readiness to attack from the side of the Russian Federation. Of course, solidarity, of course, diplomacy, but we learned our lesson in 2014.
What was that lesson about?
We have to fight, and we will fight, in case if. We must be prepared.
As they say, you are prepared now much, much better.
Yes, yes.
And
in addition, we took note, and we observers from the outside in Ukraine, we appreciate very much that the United States and other countries not only declare the readiness to support, but started to deploy arms, munition, and more things in the pipe. So it's a real thing which makes us stronger, which makes our readiness more adequate to the time. Plus, what is also important and maybe not yet evaluated properly by foreign observers, that Ukraine started to build territorial defense, a new system which is incorporated into the armed forces. And this system is also about protection of Ukrainian territory and defend of Ukrainian national interests.
what does that mean? Can you tell us more? That system, I mean, more inclusion of maximum number of people in defending the country?
Maximum number of people, of those who are in reserve, who served in the army, training, stocks of munition, and plans, what to do. Because if something happens, everybody should understand what is my maneuver, what should I do, where I have to run, to which position to occupy, and how to organize cooperation with my neighbors from left and right side. This is the territorial defense system about.
Still, I think time is very important for Ukraine, for that readiness to make it stronger again. So, do you think the West consolidation, level of the consolidation, is stronger now than, for instance, it used to be a month ago? Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian President Verkhovna Rada was quite critical of, for instance, Germany's position, even prepared some kind of address, very criticizing one. Do you think this consolidation is, and the question about Germany was put also at yesterday's briefings. Do you think this consolidation is much stronger now than it used to be?
You know, it's not...
the understanding is better.
I understand your question, and this is not the first time that I try to explain my vision, how should be the response on that question. Especially now, when we observe the real aggravation of the situation. So, since starting from 2014, from the beginning of the Russian aggression of Ukraine until now, Russian troops on the Ukrainian territory, for me, it means that sanctions and consolidations are not sufficient. They are still there, you know? And for me, sufficient means when Ukrainian territory is free of occupation forces. This is sufficient. So, of course, we would like to see more solidarity and more unity, because one of the things Kremlin is trying to do all the time, that's undermine solidarity. And if you look even at the manner how they initiated their offer, they sent already ready text, draft agreements to Washington and to NATO. That's it. No other partners. No Berlin, no Paris, NATO and Washington. Not EU even. Say they do not perceive they as partners for negotiations. And of course, for Europeans, it was a kind of a cold shower when they also were not, well, they were asking where we are. Where is our position? Where is our points? What is our role in all these attempts to discuss or approach the solution of security situation in Europe without? So, to some extent, this is a situation in which Putin wants to put Ukraine when they requested to cancel the decision of Bucharest summit about future membership of Ukraine and Georgia. It's not comfortable for any state, especially G7 members, for example. And of course, we have in Ukraine also our reasons to expect more from our partners. And of course, for me, it means that there is no clear understanding what is the danger and where is the threat.
Still.
In Europe.
Yeah, not clear enough, still not clear enough.
Not clear enough, because they still continue to think that the immediate threat is only to Ukraine, which is not correct. The whole system is undermined. Or Russia continue to try to undermine the system, which is not only Ukrainian case or problem.
Sure.
This is our common problem.
President Zelensky keeps asking one question, not only one, but one of the questions quite often. Why are you not introducing sanctions now rather than wait until after the escalation?
Again,
why do you think the West is late with sanctions? Why do you think those sanctions will be effective now and useless later?
It's very simple. Again, look at the recent history. Look at 2008 in Georgia. So, what was the result of Russian-Georgian war? It was a Sarkozy document, yes, which provides for demilitarization, yes? And from Georgian part, they fulfill 100%.
Right.
What do you see on that side of the administrative border?
Totally opposite.
In Abkhazia or in Ichkeval? Do you see any sign of demilitarization? No.
Just
Clearly no.
Yeah.
They increase borderization and they continue to increase military buildup. Look at the situation in Ukraine now. 2014. Crimea is occupied, Donetsk and Lugansk partly are occupied with Russian troops and proxies, and sanctions followed these moves. Yeah? When sanctions have been imposed on the US, did they withdraw forces from...
On Russia, you mean?
I mean
you
Russia,
said US.
from Ukraine? No.
Okay.
So could we consider these measures as effective? I see no result. Of course, it's influenced Russian economy. It creates problems for Russia, but for Ukraine, Russians are still there. They continue to increase military infrastructure in Crimea. They continue to supply money, munition, fuel to proxies on the occupied territories. It means whatever happens the next day, they will already be moved further into Ukrainian territory or onto the territory of any other state. And what we see now, that it's quite difficult or even impossible, we do not see any example that after sanctions, they withdrawn something. They could stop fighting, but what is occupied or taken would be never given back. So that is why we continue to call our partners to impose sanctions before, not after. Because the day after, they will move forward. And it would be difficult to force them to pull back. And this is my vision. And that is why it is important to think this way too. For the other example is NATO's strategy vis-à-vis the Russian Federation. So after the attack on Ukraine in 2014, it took several years for NATO to adopt new doctrine and new vision and new policy vis-à-vis Russia. It's deterrence. So it works now, deterrence. And Ukraine is part of deterrence of Russia because we deter huge forces on our border. But again, it was not sufficient. Deterrence worked to some extent. Why? Because what we see now, ultimatums from Russia, their vision of, and they demand to get back to the position of 1997, before enlargement of NATO. What does it mean? It means that deterrence is not effective enough because they dare to exercise such practice in relations with NATO, trying to demand something, which is not absolutely grounded.
Another issue, the president of Ukraine has been trying to persuade the West, quite for a while, to prompt the West with its decision on Ukraine's NATO membership. Do you think this is realistic? Because I know I meet more and more people in Georgia, out of Georgia, who think that now it is the time to prompt this step to make it quicker, this decision on Ukraine's and Georgia's accession to the alliance, despite all the situation, I mean, annexation, occupation, what is in front of us. Is it realistic, and why do you think it would be effective, it would impact positively the situation?
You know, membership in NATO is one of the strategic goals of Ukraine. Membership in NATO is fixed in the constitution of Ukraine. Of course, President Zelensky repeatedly insists on membership or granting map to Ukraine. And this is our foreign policy. Is it possible? Well, I believe that it is late already. We should, well, not we, because we believe that Ukrainian armed forces and Ukraine as a state, we are ready to be part of NATO. This is the political decision of NATO.
But it's not only about armed forces. You are well aware. It's not the readiness. Is not only about the readiness of the armed forces only.
I understand, but it's about...
That's an argument from the alliance. Yeah.
It's the readiness of alliance, but the readiness means political decision. Because, well, what NATO faced now in relations with the Russian Federation, it's, well, again, a kind of cold shower, because it's impossible to negotiate whatever with the Russian Federation, because their position is absolutely, well, arrogant and groundless. What should be the response, and why I told you, and this is my personal opinion, that decision to adopt Ukraine in NATO is already a bit late. Immediately when Russia requested or proposed or requested from NATO to withdraw to the position of 97 or 1950, immediately the decision to adopt Ukraine and Georgia should follow. Because I'm sorry to reflect on such complicated issues, but what we continue to do in Europe, in NATO, in the United States, and in Ukraine, we continue to think and act and build our strategy conventionally. What they do in Moscow, they act absolutely in terms of hybrid vision, hybrid policy, and hybrid war. So you cannot play the same game having such different rules, conventional from our side, and something, unbelievable, which is appropriate to Russia only. So where is the common ground? Doesn't exist. So it's different ways of thinking. And that is why my personal opinion is that we should be already there, Georgia and Ukraine. Because otherwise, it's quite difficult to stop or to deter aggressor. And the name of this aggressor is well known. This is the Russian Federation.
Georgian ruling party refrains from naming the name of the aggressor. In the draft resolution, I will go to that issue just in a while. I just want to go back to that Verkhovna Rada's address to Bundestag. They were asking to German deputies to help to reconsider Germany's policy towards Ukraine. And they reminded their German colleagues Martin Luther King's words. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Georgia and Ukraine are partners, are friend nations, and everybody understands Georgia's abilities cannot be compared to those I've been referring to so far during our conversation. But still, what kind of support Ukraine expects and gets from Georgia? Its government and the parliament, to be more precise now, ruling party makes decisions actually, and prefers not to even name Russian Federation in its draft resolution. Also, I noticed that Russia was not named in Georgia's foreign minister's Twitter post supporting Ukraine, and also in the statement of last December of the president of Georgia about Ukraine. How do you perceive that? I know it's not a very comfortable question for you.
No,
I know
it's
many
okay.
people may not like this question at all.
It's okay.
But this is something we all think about.
My reaction and my remarks would be very brief on that. We in Ukraine appreciate any kind of support, be it diplomatic, political, arms, munition, resolution, whatever, everything is useful because we consider these ways of support or these signs of support as additional bricks into this our joint wall which would separate us from aggression. So everything is valuable. Concerning second part of your, it's not a question but rather a remark, and I would allow myself a kind of remark too. We feel and we receive every day many different signals of support from politicians, from companies, from citizens of Georgia. For example, yeah, I saw badges on your cameraman yesterday. A wonderful light show has been organized here just opposite the building of Ukrainian Embassy.
Yeah.
This is the most important. We know and we reconfirm ourselves every day that Georgian people is with us. For example, unexpectedly, yesterday our hotline received a phone call from Georgian citizen in Georgian who wanted to go to fight in Ukraine, to protect and to defend Ukraine. And we know that Georgians are there on the front in Ukraine. So that is what is important. That is our treasure, common treasure of Ukraine and Georgia. This is our value, mutual support and readiness to be together, not only in resolutions, but in our daily work. And we are dealing, and I represent here Ukraine as a state, not a political party. So we are dealing with the state of Georgia, not with political party or with parliament or members of the parliament, with the country, with the nation, with Georgia.
I was still, you are a diplomat. I'm a journalist. I was still there to ask another question, not question, but just another remark that many people compare support of Ukraine in 2008, the scale of that support to the support Georgia expresses now, Georgian state, I mean. So that's an issue of discussion right now. I know that many politicians are coming and expressing their solidarity towards Ukraine from all parties. In one of your earliest interviews given to Formula TV, you mentioned that I was listening to the translation, translated version, of course, that to measure and analyze Russia with normal traditional categories is useless. But still, you need to look at Russia's steps, attempts, its policy, its statements, and measure it, analyze it. What do you base your analysis? Just to be better prepared. I mean Ukraine. Well,
of course, I wouldn't say that we need or we can to measure. There are many things which are not measurable, especially when you deal with Russia. Several examples, just recent examples. There are two new developments in the State Duma of the Russian Federation. The first one, the members of the Communist Party fraction called Duma to decide to recognize occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast of Ukraine as an independent part. I don't know what that. This is the pattern they used here, so-called quasi-states of Abkhazia and Tkhinval. So how to measure it? Is it measurable? Or the other decision to officially decide to supply arms and munition to proxies on the occupied Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. They do it permanently. They call it humanitarian convoys or whatever. They continue to do everything possible to make 400 kilometers long part of Ukrainian-Russian border without any control from Ukraine or even OSCE. So it's a black hole. They do whatever they want. So they need no additional decisions, official or unofficial, to supply arms. They do it. How to measure this public statement? So we face actors which act sometimes without any rational, and you cannot predict irrationality. That is why it is called irrational. And that is why, again, the only remedy or the only tool against that, to be ready, to be prepared, to increase capability, to increase internal potential and readiness. Resilience is the key.
So, in these current circumstances, what is your main hope based on? I can guess what would be the answer, but still.
Well, hopes. This is something, from the other sphere that
You were talking about the readiness.
I try to work with concrete things, and I can tell you, and I can send this message to everybody, that we Ukrainians, we know that in case if, we will fight. And I believe in Ukrainian people. I believe in Ukrainian army. I believe in solidarity. I believe in common sense, if they have any on that side in Kremlin and their proxies. So, 21st century, when we celebrated not so long ago the end of the Cold War, and our expectations failed. So we were too naive, maybe too romantic. So this is the harsh reality.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. God bless Ukraine. God bless Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you.